Oh my gosh, so excited. Today's conversation is with my new friend, your longtime friend, David Boyajian, and he is a certified sex addiction therapist. And he had so much to talk to us about understanding the difference between unwanted sexual behavior and sexual addiction in our lives and how we can get help and how that shows up in dating. And also provided some really great resources for next steps if you're curious about how this is impacting your personal story or your partner's story, how we can take the next step towards freedom.
Yeah, for everyone who might be curious about, man, am I addicted or am I just doing things that I don't want? Is there a difference between those two? And especially for the men in our listenership, I want you to be blessed. You will be so blessed by this conversation, and you're going to be equipped. You're going to leave equipped with something, some next step to do, whether that be how to have a conversation or what to do in your own healing journey. I cannot wait to hear your feedback on what you think about this conversation with licensed marriage and family therapist David Boyajian. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Dating and Desire podcast, a place for conversations and resources on sexual formation for adult Christians.
I'm Lauren Matthews.
And I'm Bridgett Blood.
Together, we combine our years of ministry experience and time as certified coaches, helping men and women just like you navigate dating in a way that honors your core values.
Each week, you'll hear us talk to therapists, pastors, coaches, and other leaders in the field of sexuality and relationships.
While we acknowledge believers hold various perspectives on this topic,
we're gathered around the belief that our desire is holy,
our body is good,
and our story matters.
Let's dive in. Well, today we have the privilege of talking about something that I think comes up in dating more than we actually acknowledge, and that is addiction. And our guest today is David Boyajian. He'll tell a little bit about himself when we toss it over to him, but I'm so thankful, David, that you agreed to be on our podcast. And I'm so thankful for your friendship and history in my life. I've known you for over a decade, almost 15 years. And it's been lovely to see your career trajectory. And I'm so glad we get to tap into your expertise on the podcast today. How you doing?
Doing well. Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited
Yeah,
to be here.
absolutely. Tell the people a little bit about what you do what you do professionally and where you are in the world. And then we'll jump into this important topic.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California, and I'm also a certified sex addiction therapist. And so I run a solo private practice virtually from my house. And I work with a number of different colleagues in my area and throughout the state. I will sometimes work a lot with a sexually addicted individual. It's mostly men that I work with, and I occasionally work with betrayed partners. So the partner's an addict in a relationship. I do couples therapy. I do mostly individual therapy, and I also run group therapies for men struggling with sexual behaviors.
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you so much. So when we thought about having you on, I thought about this passage where Jesus is talking about lust, and he says, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. If your hand offends you, cut it off. If you look on a woman to lust after her, you've already committed sin in your heart. This is the verse that comes like front of mind when I think about addiction and lust. And I want to start off by getting your take on what do you think Jesus is talking about? Like,
Mm,
what is lust? Because I think what is lust and what is addiction,
yeah.
actually?
Yeah. So great question. It's a loaded question. I mean, there's a lot to it, I think, but lust is, I think, sexual objectification. So there's obviously a debate. Well, can you have healthy lust? Is lust
Mm.
always bad? I mean, I think there's different contexts for it, but I think there could be a healthy sense of lust in a marital relationship um, with committed individuals, but it's not the same as what we would describe lust in the Bible, I would say. So I think when Jesus is talking about lust, I think he's talking about sexual objectification. In other words, that you are um, reducing a person to an object, right? That's what objectification is. You're not seeing their humanity. You're not seeing their value. You're not seeing their emotional life. You're not seeing their psychological life. You're not seeing their spirit. You're just reducing them to an object for sexual pleasure. So um, yeah, I think that's probably the best definition I could give, just more simply. Yeah, that it's lust is a sexual objectification. Um, and but yeah, and there's other ways you could talk about that. I mean, in the recovery community, there's this idea of rubbernecking, which is basically
Mm,
staring at someone too long. So like, yeah, the term comes from when you're driving on the freeway and you see an accident and you look over and then your head keeps you keep driving straight, but then your head keeps tilting to look over at the accident.
mm.
Is rubbernecking lust? It might be, it might not be, but there's other things to get into there. But I think my the initial answer is probably what I would say Jesus is talking about.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I always love to say is that lust removes someone from the context of their story and acts
Mhm.
like it's no big deal.
Yes.
And so I really loved even just how I don't know, I like alliteration, my brain kinda works like that, so when you say like, "Oh, sexual objectification," I'm like, "Well, there's a really big difference between sexual objectification and sexual observation." Of
Mhm.
our
Yes.
physical brain getting a cue. Emily Nagowski has a book, Come As You Are. It's probably it's not a faith based book, but I would say it's a really great resource on understanding how our bodies work sexually, especially for women. And so she talks about like the learning, liking, wanting system. And so our bodies can be sexually activated, meaning, oh, my brain's getting a message. This is a sexual cue without it being a lustful objectification of another person, removing them. It's just like, oh, that's an attractive person, or something in my body comes alive in their attractiveness, in their kindness, in their talent or skill. That I think is really important for people to kind of understand the difference of those. So I love that.
Yeah. One other thing I would say too is one of my colleagues refers to lust as possession.
Hmm.
So if you are trying to possess somebody or obsess about somebody, then
Mm.
that's usually a sign that you're objectifying them, that you're lusting after them. So
Yeah, I think
yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Lauren.
I was gonna say, I think about this in terms of one of the definitions of lust I really appreciate is um includes a component that's about consumption,
Mm,
Mm.
which is different than enjoyment or
yes.
a participatory experience. It's about, I want to have you. I want to
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
consume you. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think that's another way we're fleshing out the picture. I mean, the reason what is lust comes up as a question is because I think we've all experienced religious communities conflating an observation of beauty with a desire to consume it. But when we conflate those things, when we act like knowing what's beautiful and lusting are the same thing, there could be a lot of confusion around, am I addicted? Not just am I looking at illicit material, but like, am I addicted? So can you talk a little bit about how someone can know that they're more than just looking at something illicit, but are actually in the throes of addiction?
Yes. So sex addiction, porn addiction, lust addiction, those are all very real. There are some people who actually don't think it's real. So there's people in the mental health community that are vehemently against this idea. And they actively say um, that it is religious folks that are basically putting puritanical values on the culture, and that this is there is no such thing as sex addiction. So there is real pushback. I mean, I was just looking at articles. I think it was just last night or the other night of someone that was making that argument. And so I just want to sort of state my opinion very clearly. Obviously, that I do think it's real. Of course, obviously, I wouldn't be in the field if I didn't think it was real. But um, in the same way that you can get addicted to almost anything, you can get addicted to lust or pornography or any sort of sexual behaviors. So how do you tell if you're addicted or not? So there's a lot of different criteria for addiction. So if we want to
Mhm.
get really diagnostic, the World Health Organization has a book called the ICD, which is the International Classification of Diseases, which is their version of American DSM. So we're familiar with the DSM because that's the book that diagnoses all mental health issues. The ICD has a definition of compulsive sexual behavior disorder. So they have an actual disorder that they've created. So there is diagnostic criteria to define a sex addiction in there. So I could get into that if we want to, but on a more practical level, the simplest thing I can say is that if you are trying to stop a behavior, a
Mhm.
sexual behavior, and you repeatedly try to stop and you repeatedly experience negative consequences as a result, um, then you probably have some mild form of addiction. Because if this is just something that you occasionally struggle with and that you try to stop and you're able to stop, okay, well, you probably don't have an addiction then. But if you continue to experience negative consequences, if people in your life are upset with you and you're experiencing negative emotion, you're experiencing uh, problems at your work, you're missing deadlines, you're losing sleep, you're staying up too late, you're having all these consequences, and yet you still continue to do it. Then that's sort of the most practical way I could tell somebody um, if they have an addiction or not. Um,
Yeah, I hear you.
so, oh, go ahead.
I hear you saying it gets in the way of the normal outworking of how you want your life to go. You're repeatedly staying up too late, missing deadlines, maybe missing work, misusing your funds, your money, um, in addition to the distress of doing something you don't want to do and feeling out of control, not being able to say, ugh, I did that thing and I hate that. I'm moving on with my life for weeks, months, years, but
Yeah,
repeatedly and for an extended period of time, staying with it.
yeah.
That's helpful. That's super helpful.
Yeah. And one thing I will add too, within the Christian community and other religious communities in particular, um, the issue of shame comes up a lot. And basically, shame makes the problem worse. And so there's actually a lot of people that will encounter on occasion that will think they're addicted when they're not, but it's really their shame is causing their emotional distress. And so they might look at pornography once a month and think I'm addicted.
Mhm.
Um, you're probably not, but because you have so much shame about the behavior, you're experiencing a lot of negative emotion. And then that shame is then leading you back to the behavior again, as opposed to there being actually a neurobiological issue. If another way of sort of defining addiction, at least sex addiction broadly, is it's an intimacy and attachment disorder, and it's a neurobiological disorder. So you develop an intimacy and attachment disorder when you develop insecure attachments in childhood. So anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment styles. And those are due to having attachment wounds, attachment injuries, we call them, um, neglect, abuse, trauma. All those things uh, affect a person's uh, emotional well-being in their psyche. And so it tends to be that if you have those attachment injuries and wounds, you can develop a sex addiction more easily. And then I say it's a neurobiological disorder as well because your uh, dopaminergic um, pathways in your brain have been altered so that your levels of dopamine and the speed at which you get dopamine release in your brain
Yeah.
has shifted from a normal amount to an unhealthy abnormal amount, which creates addiction and is a fuel for more addictive behaviors.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
super
beautiful.
helpful. Thank you.
It's interesting, I always think it's important whenever we have these conversations, like you mentioned, like shame gets really triggered. And I am one of those, I'm going to call it a weird person and I'm okay with it. I really appreciate shame. And what I mean by that is unprocessed shame does cause tons and tons of damage in our bodies. And we see that. But I think shame in the way that it was designed by God in our brains to function was more of I like to say shame helps me examine who I am and who I'm not. And so, I think it's Ann Boskamp that talks about shame dies when our stories are held in safe places. And so I think there can be this really heightened sense of, oh my gosh, I'm horrible. I'm this bad person. And I think when we're talking about addiction or any sort of sexual behavior that doesn't align with our values, it's really important for us to understand that it's not because we're bad people. It's because we were little kids that didn't have our stories held well, that we didn't have what our brains and body needed to flourish. And so obviously there are horrible ramifications of how it impacts your own life and the life of those around you. But I loved, you used really big medical terms there, which I love nerding out on that. But it's basically, we end up with a disordered life when we have experiences as little kids who don't have language, where our brains and our bodies are not in safe places. And so it makes sense that our bodies would move towards an outlet, something like sexuality, that has such a bonding electric charge to
Yeah.
wire our brains and bodies as God designed it. But when it gets twisted is when we end up in the painful experiences. So thank you for bringing those definitions.
Yeah. I can hear divergent voices in my head listening to our podcast and saying things like, you're trying to absolve people from their personal responsibility. Nope. Just
Mm,
because you had a wounding in your
Yeah.
childhood, you
Yeah.
still got on the internet. You still
yeah.
looked up fill-in-the-blank-thing.com and went to this source. So when you think about that connection between wounding that forms um, a pathway, a way that feels is more easy, a trodden path, and personal responsibility. Maybe even with your clients, David. How do you talk about the connection between what I'm choosing to do and what I've been conditioned to do? Maybe even through my
Mm,
own initial choices.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I place a heavy emphasis on personal responsibility for my clients because, especially when they've betrayed their partner, and
uh-huh.
95% of my clients are in relationships. They're married, or they have they're in a serious relationship of some kind, um, and they have to recognize that they have caused damage and that they have made choices, that they have made choices and not something else, right? That they have made choices that led to um, this betrayal and led to furthering their addiction. And so obviously, I emphasize both. I help people to understand that you didn't just end up here accidentally. There's a reason why you're in the position you're in. There's a reason why you are addicted right now. Um, and you didn't have control over those things, or some of those things, I should say. You didn't have control over your abuse. You didn't have control over neglect. You didn't have control over who your parents were and how they raised you and all that. Um, and at the same time, you also have a choice and you need to take responsibility for those choices. Um, it, I would say at first we talk a lot about the choices because that's what really matters. And um, in in terms of developing empathy for your partner who you've betrayed, and
Mm-hmm.
because the partner is in a state oftentimes of PTSD, they don't want to hear, oh, well, here I acted out. I saw that prostitute because my mom wasn't there for me
Yes.
as a child, right? That doesn't work. And so the partner is obviously going to be extremely hurt by that and offended by that. And how dare you, how dare you blame this on your past? Like, you need to take responsibility. So yeah. So long story short, I guess we really try to emphasize the responsibility component first in my client, and then later on we develop more of an awareness of how did you get here. because we
Yeah.
really have to get them out of denial. We have to get them into a state of self-awareness of like what's going on in the present, and then we can delve a lot more into the past. Once they're ready to, we can do that deeper trauma work later. But at first, it's just containment. We need to kind of figure out how are we going to move forward? How are you going to how can you help your partner heal? How can you start to stop your behavior? Frankly, just really getting behavioral therapy unlock, um, and then moving into the deeper work. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. It does. And in the course of answering, you mentioned the majority of your clients are married or in committed relationships. So for the dating, for the engaged partners that are coming in to do work with you, I can imagine this isn't something that's new once they're in this relationship. And so I wonder, from your perspective, if you could shed some light on how someone who has a sex addiction, pornography addiction, any unwanted sexual desire or yeah, behavior in their story, how can they
Mhm.
begin to understand when they're ready to engage in finding romantic partnership, in dating, when
Yeah,
this has been a part of their story or if they're in various parts of the recovery journey?
yeah. So how do they know when they're ready to date, basically, or move
Yeah.
into? Yeah. So I thought about this, and there's kind of a subjective and an objective answer to this. I think the
Okay.
subjective, really simply, is if you don't feel comfortable talking about your past uh, sexual brokenness and your current state of recovery, then you're not ready to date.
That's good.
Um, so
Awesome.
because you have to feel confident about this, you cannot walk into this with a feeling uh, or a feeling of shame, or just bringing all that shame and self-pity into the relationship. That's not it shows that you haven't done enough work on yourself. It shows that you haven't really taken enough time to really heal from some of the wounds that you're dealing with. So um, it I don't expect people to be fully healed, so let me be really clear about that. This is a long journey for most people who are dealing with any sort of sexual addictions, or porn addiction, or lust addiction. This uh, oftentimes takes a lifetime of accountability. Okay, that sounds very serious, but that's the majority of addiction. And um, so that lifetime of accountability is going to look different for certain people, right? It's not going to be going to a 12-step meeting every day necessarily for the rest of your life or something, but it does mean that there would probably be some sort of accountability for a long period of time, because yeah, the research shows and just experience shows that these issues don't just poof, go away. You heal tremendously, but once you've altered the brain, um, there is it is very difficult for that to be fully healed to the point where it's never an issue ever again.
Mhm.
So
Um,
another stressful situation comes up, and that old pathway is an easy one to go down for
yes,
relief of the stress or
yes,
soothing from the distressing
yeah,
situation. Yeah.
yeah. Glad you brought that up. Yeah, absolutely. Um, And so, but yeah, you're asking, yeah, so how do we know when we're ready? So I gave you the subjective answer. So I think the more objective answer, or maybe to kind of put some numbers on it for people, is I would say if you have simply an addiction to porn, let's say, and you're you're sober for 3 to 6 months, I would say that's probably a good time range to maybe consider starting to date. Um, Most people don't do that. So I don't think most people wait that 3 month mark or the 6 month mark. And the reason I say 3 months at least is because that's when you have the best opportunity for dopaminergic reset in your brain. So
So
90
that is
days,
your your brain stops needing that heightened level of
Yes.
dopamine to function. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm using kind of a big language there,
No,
but
you're
yes,
good. You're good.
it resets your brain. It resets dopamine levels. That's your best chance at that the 90-day, 3-month mark.
Mm,
And so we always really try to emphasize getting at least 90 days of sobriety in recovery, and we even recommend couples that are married to be celibate for 3 months for the addict's brain to reset. So, but in terms of singleness, obviously, um, yeah, I recommend the 3-month mark for sobriety, and at that point you can have a lot more clarity,
mm,
emotionally, mentally, and you tend to make better choices with the people you're with too. Because if you're still in active addiction, um, you're not necessarily going to make the best possible choices with the person you're dating, and you're not going to notice things about the person, or you're going to you might move into that dating relationship too quickly, because lust is fueling some of it, right? So just getting time of sobriety is like defogging the window. It's like you're driving down the
yeah.
road. You can still drive, you can still kind of see, but when you defrost the window, you can see clearly, and that sobriety is what defrosts, and you can drive more clearly, and you can see what you're doing and have a lot more self-awareness, and a lot more self-control, I think, in the dating process.
Yeah. I have some questions to that.
Yes,
So I kind
please.
of have a two-part question. So I have a little bit of fear just because we're kind of lumping them into two things. We've talked about sex addiction, and then we've talked about engaging in some sort of unwanted sexual behavior, whether that be porn or masturbation or whatever it is. And so to be able to kind of separate that, like, um, someone who has a sexual habit of masturbating once every 3 months is very different than someone who's in an active addiction of, like, I'm watching porn and masturbating 20 times a day. Like that, those are two very different examples. So can we just kind of dissect that a little bit more of like, um, right? Because I think the reason why I asked that is I think because of the religious shame component, we've kind of lumped it all into one thing, and I think it's the
Yeah.
kind of the same idea. As if you were to go to a medical doctor, there's a difference between um, you were outside helping build a shed and you accidentally broke your pinky finger, and oh, I've severed my arm off. Like the healing journey on that. So can we just talk about a little bit of the difference of what's the difference between some sort of compulsive sexual behavior or unwanted sexual behavior on a can we kind of address the scale of problematic behavior?
Yeah, no,
Can I
that's a
add one
great.
more example before you jump into scale,
Yeah.
David? One more
Mhm.
example from the female perspective. There's a difference between masturbating compulsively 20 times a day and masturbating at the height of ovulation when you are most fertile
Correct.
and most sexually
Yeah,
arousable anyway. Like, so
sure.
as a
Yes.
female example,
Yeah,
go
yeah,
for it.
I
Yes.
appreciate that. So I mean, there's definitely obviously a spectrum of this, and you can have mild addiction or severe addiction and everything in between. Uh, so, uh, are you kind of looking for maybe examples of what would be considered like a mild addiction? Um,
Well, I guess what happened for me is I heard 3 months and I went, ooh, I have a little bit of fear about that. But I think it depends really on on the specifics of the conversation,
got it.
um, of just kind of for me, any sort of unwanted behavior, whether it's scrolling on TikTok or binge eating, or
Yeah.
I don't care what it is. Like for me, does this person have a new plan to process pain? Because if the if the unwanted behavior was the coping mechanism for pain, again, we're not going to all figure, like, we're not going to arrive to dating perfect. We're all going to have our issues. I sure have my issues. But I think what creates safety um, is knowing that there's some sort of guardrail or safety net of, hey, I am making step towards growth in my life and this is how I'm doing it, not simply a like, oh, I've grin and bared it, like I've done it all by myself for 3 months.
Knuckled it. I've gotten 6 months of freedom and now I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so yeah, that adds some clarity. So yes, if you're just white knuckling it, that would
Hmm.
not be healthy. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, so, yeah. If if you're 3 months sober because you've been surrendering spiritually, because you've been getting accountability, because you've been talking about your issue and being emotionally available and yeah, actively connecting with other individuals in recovery or who are also struggling with this issue, um, then I would say that's a more a legitimate sobriety, you should say. I mean, we use the term dry drunk in AA,
Yes.
they use that, right? So you could be sober for a year, you could be dry from alcohol and have never sipped a drink, but yet all the other areas of your life are still a mess. They're still unmanageable.
Hmm.
You're still, you're still a workaholic. You're still stressed out. Your relationship is
No
still having
support.
problems.
Yeah.
You're not, in touch with your feelings. You're just, you know, running amok basically in every other area. But I haven't,
Yeah.
acted out with my drug of choice. So yeah, there's that element. But then you also mentioned um, that like how do we sort of discern the difference between somebody who just has like problematic sexual behavior versus someone who has an addiction, right?
Yes.
You wanted some more clarity on that? Yeah. So um, it there are ways to test for it more diagnostically. So, like if I wanted to really see if someone has a problem, I'll give them the SDI, which is the sexual dependency inventory, and that
Hmm.
gives a scale on. Well, there's a thing within it called the SAST, which gives a 0 to 20 scale of how addicted I am. And so 6 and above is addiction level, mild to severe. But yeah, I mean, if we're talking just like on more of a practical level, um, if someone is if someone is thinking about sex daily, they're fantasizing daily, they're obsessing, they're preoccupied with sex, and they're, let's say maybe they're masturbating to porn once a week. I would say that person has probably a mild addiction
Hmm.
to lust or porn or sexual behavior. And that person really should be getting help for their problem, obviously, if they have that kind of an addiction. And then, um, but yeah, and then it could just kind of can increase from there. So I don't know if that answers your question. I apologize if I'm not.
Yeah, no, that answered my question. My question wasn't about judgment of the behavior. It was more about like I think it's important for people. I think my brain went to um if someone is in a dating relationship and their partner shares, hey, this is my sexual story, this is what's happening, just to kind of have some sort of framework so that the struggling partner can get the best care. And so I think, well, because there's such a high shame response, it can be like, oh, don't tell anybody about this. Where that's where I
Yeah.
kind of gave the like, there's a difference between breaking your pinky and cutting off your arm. And so I think it's just important for people just to kind of have some sort of range of, is this a hey, um, I need to go tell my mentor? Is this a, hey, I need to reach out to a therapist? Is this a like, hey, I need some sort of inpatient care? Just so that people kind of had something. So yeah, I appreciate the clarity on that.
Yeah, yeah. But did you want me to expand on that more or no?
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, um, what I encounter most within the church is um, typically typically it's just porn addiction, but it's not always that, right? There's people who have affairs, there's people who are saying sex workers are paying for sex. Um, so I do see that too, obviously. But I think for the majority of people, for the majority of people who are struggling with any sort of mild addiction to porn or masturbation or lust or sexual fantasy, I think those people should be in some sort of a weekly accountability group. Um, so there are ministries like Pure Desire, for instance, they run,
Yes, love
uh,
them.
yeah, there's Celebrate Recovery. as well, which is not specifically sex addiction related, but it's more addictions, broadly speaking. Um, I'm a big fan of 12 step. I think a lot more people should be in 12 step programs. I think there's a lot of men who I think would highly benefit from it, even if they don't relate to all of it, because the 12 step programs are very serious. And when you work a 12 step, it's changes your life, and you have a sponsor, and which is basically a mentor that's guiding you through this process. And um, in my own experience, I did 12-step programs and they were really helpful. And I think more men in the church especially should be engaging in those kinds of groups, at least just checking them out just to see how much they relate to it. And yeah, but it does it for some people it will feel like too much of a step, like, oh, this is only for the really serious, ish people,
Mm.
or the people who, really have problems versus, someone like that maybe just thinks, oh, I occasionally struggle with porn. But I do think most people need some sort of accountability, and practically speaking, that would be like a weekly sort of meetup, an accountability group, that has some direction to it too, though, because sometimes um, it's a lot of blind leading the blind. I was actually just having a conversation with a woman just a week ago in the church who is now divorced because her husband uh, had a sexual addiction issue. I don't know the details. I don't know if he had cheated. I'm not sure what the
Mhm.
context was, but she was very aware of the pure desire group that was going on at this church, and there was a lot of bad advice being given at this group, and the pastor recently
Mm.
shut the group down um, because there was so much toxic stuff being said about how to handle this in your relationship. And, well, no, your wife can't tell you that. That's not fair. And it's stuff that, as a therapist, I was thinking, like, no, this is horrible advice. And the pastor, I think, rightly made a good move by stopping the group. So, um,
Mm.
yeah, so that's not a knock on pure desire. That's a knock on the people who were in this group who were speaking authoritatively on things they should not be speaking authoritatively on, right?
And I think it's a helpful reminder too that when you're seeking help through a therapist, through a group, through any avenue that you're looking for, I like the way what you said sets an expectation that we might have to try a few things on before we find the right fit. That
Yes, yes,
every practitioner you go to is not going to be able to meet your need. You might be looking for a fit along the way.
absolutely, yeah, yeah, and I mean that also brings up obviously another point that if the problem is if someone feels that the problem is serious enough, they should go to therapy for it, right? So I mean, I have a lot of clients that reach out to me because they are self-identified as porn addicts or sex addicts. So once they've taken the step to say that, like, I know I have a problem and I know I have an addiction to porn or lust or sex, generally speaking, um, then that's a good time to be in therapy, and that's also a good time to maybe even check out group therapy as well. Which for men in particular, group therapy has the most positive benefit. That when they ask men research this stuff, typically the outcomes are a little bit better and faster for men when they're in group therapy versus individual therapy,
How do you
Fascinating.
think that is, David?
because they're getting camaraderie that they're not used to. They're getting
Mm,
a level of connection that they're not used to with other men, and I think it's really inspiring and motivating, and it allows men to feel a sense of safety that they're just not used to. Because most men, when they spend time with each other, are not being very emotionally available and vulnerable with each other, and not talking about their struggles. And when you get into a room where the whole point is to talk about your struggles, men do really well because typically they can be really raw, um, and upfront, and because they're seeing other men do this as well. And I think I think once that's sort of unlocked, like once the safety is unlocked, I think for men they can uh, feel comfortable pretty quickly, surprisingly. Once when they're with other men that they feel safe with. I don't
So
know. I don't know how it translates with women, so I can't speak to that. But I know for men, that's been my experience, and that's what I've heard from clients as well.
it's so hope giving because I think when you have been given or have given yourself the label of addict, porn, or whatever, um, the shame that is dumped on that makes it feel like there's no coming back from this. Now this is just what I am. And
Hmm.
it's beautiful for me to hear you say, not only does the group setting facilitate this healing, but that it's a, you know, direct healing. Like you're able to get momentum and start seeing the evidence that you are not a bad person. You have done, or especially bad, but you've, you've been doing bad things. You've been broken and there is healing and it's accessible to you. I think that's encouraging and giving because life giving to me. Because I think about in a dating relationship, when I have been given or received this title, the question becomes, gosh, when do I disclose? When do I talk to my
Hmm.
partner about this thing that's a part of my story? So, given your experience in helping people in recovery and working with partners, betrayed partners, I wonder if you could give some like best practices for how to talk about this, especially as relationship is growing in seriousness and commitment. How do you talk about sexual addiction or pornography addiction, lust addiction with a partner in a way that builds trust and doesn't just cost you relationship? Because that's the fear, right?
Yeah, so I don't recommend talking about it on the first date. For
Awesome.
me, for me in particular, it comes up right away because, well, how did you become a sex addiction therapist? Well, I'm not going to lie to them. It's a part of
Yeah.
my story that I had porn addiction and lust addiction, and that I'm someone that stays in active recovery and accountability for those issues. And so I can say that confidently. And when I say it confidently, it's never turned anyone away from from what I can tell. Like I've never had anyone just, you know, get shocked by that because I think people see that this problem is ubiquitous. It's everywhere,
Hmm.
right? And so, um, yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, David.
yeah,
It is ubiquitous.
yeah,
We have to amplify that. This is not just something that bad people do.
yes,
Recent studies have said that initial exposure to pornography is the age is dropping and dropping from like 11 to 8. This is something that if you are a dater or not, even if you're married, like it is likely that your partner has seen porn. And seeing it doesn't mean addicted, but your partner has seen porn. And so this needs to be a when did it happen, not a
Hmm.
has it ever happened kind of
yeah,
conversation.
yeah. And so I think my experience has been that people do, at least women, I can say, do understand that this is everywhere and that there's probably going to be some sort of experience with this that men have had. I will say though, I do notice that people do misunderstand what the use of porn means. So, like,
Yes.
a lot of women will assume that if he's looking at porn, that means he's not attracted to me. If he's looking at porn, that means
Hmm.
he doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. Um,
Hmm.
my relationship was just a facade. This is not real, right? So there are misconceptions that I have to psychoeducate partners on at times um, about this. But going to your question, how do you talk about this, right? So one way I sort of phrase it is like most men. I mean, I'll just talk from a male perspective. If I was trying to give advice to another guy in the dating process, when that issue does come up in a natural way, I would say, and if it comes up in a natural way, but we can get to that later. But this is, or as you know, sexual brokenness is a common theme amongst most people, and especially men, and um, that and sexual brokenness is a part of my past. But here's what I'm doing to work on that, and here's the ways in which I've healed from that, and the progress I've made. So. Um, yeah, it's a thing. A lot of people struggle with it. I'm one of those people. Um, and yeah, and here's what I'm doing basically.
Yeah,
Here's
this is how
here's
I'm caring for myself. This is
yeah.
how I'm
Mhm.
keeping myself healthy um in this process. I love that. Do you have any ideas or opinions about, you said not on the first date. Do you have any opinions about
Yeah.
when in a relationship development it's appropriate um to initiate this conversation if it hasn't come up naturally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a silver bullet answer for that. I would
No.
Yeah.
say the thought that came to my mind when I was thinking about this ahead of time was like after maybe the second or third date that you then start to open up about some of this stuff. Um, I know my metric is different because I'm a very uh, open person. I'm very
Mhm.
transparent, and I've been too transparent before. And so, like, my natural go-to is to just be very open about my struggles and I get to know people very quickly. And I know not everyone is like that, so I wouldn't recommend my style to everyone because I can talk about it right away. I can talk about it and before I have even met the person in person, I'm just texting with them, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so, but and so, but I've heard like I have a colleague who was starting to date again, and they were a sex addiction therapist, and they decided to bring it up with their partner on the second date, and that felt appropriate for the partner because I talked to the partner, um, I talked to her one time about it because she was telling me she's like, oh wow, you tell them right away, and I'm like, well, that's just me, that's um, I'm a little bit different in that regard, um, but no, I think the I think it's better to talk about it early on so that there's no misconceptions about what I'm getting myself into. And I think
Yeah.
it is really important for both men and women to recognize, obviously, that this issue is uh, everywhere and prevalent, and everyone has a sexual past and sexual brokenness, and it looks different for some people, right? Like
Yeah.
for some people, they may never have had an addiction, but they've been in a lot of codependent relationships. And that's something I would want to know pretty soon too when I'm dating somebody. Hey, like, what's your dating history? Why did you stay in a 7-year relationship even though you knew it wasn't healthy for you? Like,
Yeah.
what have you learned
For
from
sure.
that? How
Yeah.
do you feel like you healed from that? So anyway,
Mhm.
So good.
yeah,
Yeah. What
Yeah.
comes to mind to me when when I hear that is, I kind of mentioned it before, is there a new healthy plan to process pain?
Yeah.
So, I think
interesting.
about when I've had these conversations, right, in my own dating experience, um, there are, um there's my preference. There's my preference of, hey, it would create a lot of sexual safety for me to be with a partner who is this far along in their dating journey, and that number is my personal preference of what feels safe for me. There's things where I go, "Ooh, I have a little concern about that," but I would ask follow-up questions, which are, "Okay, how are you creating safety? How are you getting care? Who knows about this?" Like, those type of questions. Um, and I think it is fair to say that, um, what your personal, bandwidth is. I mean, that's not just sexual addiction, but obviously, you said about the codependency or whatever. Um, if you are showing up in those beginning stages of dating, which I think is appropriate, I think that we're adults, and to be
Hmm.
able to say, hey,
Yeah,
this is really what I'm working through right now, whether it's sex addiction or not, that the other person has the right to say, I actually don't have the capacity to carry this with you. And that's
Right.
not a judgment on your character. That's a person's, I don't have the resource to, not even just the resource, but I don't have the capacity to hold that. And I think that those conversations can be held with a lot of honor in any option of how that conversation goes. But I do think that initiating those conversations early are important um, and necessary. And I also think having other people, one of the things that's really a core value for me is like having a board of advisors in my life. David, you haven't known me very long. It's just been an hour. But I call him my board of advisor, and my best friend Julie I call her my CEO. It's Jesus and Julie, like my CEO. And so, like, these are conversations that I'm having of like, "Oh, hey, like, this was a conversation I had with this man I was dating, and these are some of the things that felt really safe to me and really great. Here's some other components that he brought up that I went, I'm a little triggered by that, or that impacts my story, or hey, I'm actually not quite sure that I'm in a season where I can hold that. And again, that could be a sexual thing, but that could also be like, hey, he lives in Florida, and I don't actually know if in this season I have the capacity to hold a long distance relationship like I had last year, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I appreciate your clarity. I think that's shows a lot of integrity, to be able to say, "Hey," but I think the big thing that stood out to me when you were talking is that you feel confident in
Yeah.
regardless of how a woman responds to you, you have internal safety to go, "I know that I've done my work. I know that I have my resource, and no matter how she responds to me, I'm gonna be okay."
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it was in my situation, my issue was on the milder end, and I don't say that to
Mhm.
minimize it,
Yeah.
but it really was, like, objectively speaking, it was, and I took it really seriously. And some people probably thought I took it too seriously at times, or pathologized myself maybe at times, which maybe I did, but I've had varying degrees of uh, seriousness and unseriousness. It's gone in waves at times in my life, and I'm 39 now, so there's been there's been many years of kind of processing through that, um, but uh, but yeah, I really like what you said, and I completely agree, and it's certainly. Oh, to my point, I was going to say was that if you have struggled with it to a stronger degree, then
Mhm.
you may need to wait a little bit longer to talk about it. But at the end of the day, confidence, like you said, is and security within yourself about your story is super important. I mean, I meet people all the time. You meet a lot of people who struggle with alcohol addiction, and they're very open about it. Oh, like
Yeah.
I'm a former alcoholic, and like I have 5 years of recovery, and everyone's like, yay, right? We don't have that with sex addiction yet. There's not this like, there's not like I've been a porn addict, and everyone's like, yay,
You're
there's
free.
none of, yeah, there isn't that. It's probably going to take, I would say, at least another generation for that to shift, maybe,
Mhm.
to where people could talk about it like as openly as we do other addictions. Um, but yeah, I think just going back to the point of, yeah, when you feel comfortable, when you feel confident in your story, and depending upon the severity of it too, right? I mean, there are some clients I have that their addiction led them to some very dark places,
Yeah.
Yes.
and so, you need to be very careful and tread very lightly on that issue, but also don't hide it. You can't hide it. It's part of
Mhm.
your story.
Yeah.
Um, and you need to be willing to take the risk of vulnerability to be open with somebody. And both parties have to do that, right?
Mhm.
There's a risk. There's always a risk in sharing part of your story, but you have to own it. You have to accept it, and if I think people can get to that place of acceptance when they have done the work,
Yes.
when they have
In community.
accountability for these things, when they are really, yeah, because that gives them a sense of hope, that gives them a sense of direction. They can look at the past and see how they've grown, and how much more grounded they are now. um, and that's attractive. Like when I can meet somebody who can own their story or own their mistakes, like I don't really care at that point. Like, okay, great, that's who you used to be, but who are you
Mhm.
now? That's who I care about.
Yeah.
So when I'm dating anyone too, that's my metric. And frankly, like I said, it's not the past that matters as much as the confidence you have in the work you've done to
Mm.
get to the place you're at.
Yeah. I love that. Um, David, as we wind down our time together, I want to ask you one question about, and it's a dreaming question, because we talked a lot about the fact that overcoming an addiction is not something you will do in isolation. You're going to do it in community, chosen community like your therapist or friends that you allow to come into it, and unchosen community like who shows up at your 12-step meeting or your church community. So I want you to dream a little bit with us out loud and tell me, in a perfect world, how would the church facilitate healing in this area? What would the church do to make this a path of honor and dignity and not exacerbation?
You know, I think because I'm so 12-step biased, it's hard for me to see beyond that.
Okay,
I don't know of anything that works better. And
nice.
so
So
I,
hosting a 12-step group, maybe.
yes, yes, I'm not, yeah, I have not seen the other parachurch ministries do as good of a job as a 12-step program can do. The problem with the 12-step program for the church is that it's not strictly Jesus. Uh, it's not strictly the Christian faith, right? It's you find a higher
Or
power,
power.
you go on a spiritual journey. I really like that for people, for because even there are even Christians who I think believe for reasons they don't know why they're believing, and going on a spiritual journey to really to deconstruct at some level their
Yeah.
understanding um, of Christianity and God is really important, especially in the recovery process, because there's been a lack of connection spiritually that is influencing this issue. The opposite of addiction is connection, as Gabor Mate will famously say. So I think there's a lack of connection spiritually that people are experiencing that is contributing to their addictive behavior. So yeah, I don't, yeah. So dream, yeah. I mean, because I get that question. I've gotten that question from pastors too. Like, what should the church be doing? And I really just tell them, like, send them to a 12-step group.
Mm,
That's been the best thing that has worked. But I mean, if there could be maybe um, an even better version of that church communities could create, great, do it, awesome. I don't know what that looks like just yet. Maybe that's the 24-step program. Maybe that's maybe that's the 13-step program. Maybe that's I don't know, but it just provides so much structured discipleship, frankly, even though it's not called that with a sponsor, and the uh, going on a spiritual journey and taking a moral inventory and making amends with everyone you've hurt in your life. I mean, it's like a complete reckoning. I mean, and it's founded on Christian principles. So if we want to get right to it, right, the founders of AA used Christian teaching, and some of them themselves were Christians. So it's already, I think it's already been sort of what was the word I used the other day? Not ordained, but um, yeah, I guess kind of blessed. I do feel like the 12-step
it's a
program
good format.
has a um, has been anointed. That's the word, anointed. Like
Hmm.
there's kind of this there's a power to it that I think um, I don't think is accidental
Yeah. I think
in
if we
some way.
can keep, like, op- appropriately open the curtain to the fact that we are sexual beings and that's part of God's good design around us, and kind of um, flip the script on what we've been doing of not talking about this and letting things fester in the darkness. I think, like, bringing our sexuality as people to the light can be helpful, even ahead of the circumstance of an addiction, to help normalize this part of our lives. But leaning into good things that are already in existence, and maybe shaking off some of our fear of um, particular language, and knowing God's big T truth is in everything. It's in every breath. It's in every place that truth exists is His, and so we can honor it wherever it goes, wherever we find it. So good. Ah, David, thank you so much for being our guest today, for talking so candidly about how we can conceptualize what it's like to be addicted and how we can date effectively and be dated effectively when this is part of our story. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun. I feel like we could go on for days too. With
For sure.
brings up so many good questions and things to process.
Yeah. We'll keep processing here.
David, w- one question.
Yeah.
So you're located in California?
Yes. San Diego.
Okay, so are you, I just because of licensing and stuff, you only can accept clients in California, slash, do you have availability if people wanted to reach out to you living in California, or how does that work?
Yeah. So I can only see clients who reside in California. Um, and I don't currently at this very moment have availability,
Okay.
um, but
Okay.
yeah, but uh, but that changes occasionally. So yeah, most sex addiction therapists are full all the time. Kind of sadly, there's a huge need there. We need more people like myself in this field. We need more betrayal trauma therapists. There's just a huge demand. There's
Yes.
no shortage of work. Um, and yes, but there's, we all have openings at some point, so I don't want to discourage people from trying to reach out and get help. There are a lot of therapists who do this, and stay persistent. If you're really wanting to get into treatment, stay hopeful and stay persistent, and I believe you'll find what you need.
Do you have any other resources if people are listening and they go, "Oh, I actually have curiosity about my own story, about my partner's story." Any books,
Yes.
resources, communities that are good connection?
Yeah. As far as books on sexual brokenness and addiction, probably the best one I could recommend is Unwanted by Jay Stringer. That's a really, really popular one. Um, if you're kind of curious about if you have a sex addiction or porn addiction, a good book is Sex Addiction 101 by Rob Weiss, Weiss. He's out of Los Angeles. He's written a number of books on addiction and betrayal trauma and treatment. There's let's see. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts on sexual addiction.
Mhm.
Rob Weiss, who I just mentioned, has Sex, Love, and Addiction podcast. There's um, there's Porn Free Radio, it's another good podcast. There's a lot. There's a lot out there.
Excellent.
And yeah, so I could probably go on for a while, but there are a lot of resources. Yes, there's free webinars too on this stuff. If people have questions on whether or how to deal with or navigate the issues of addiction in their relationship or between partners or addicts, that website would be sexandrelationshiphealing.com. So that's another good resource.
Well, David, thanks for being on the show. We're so glad that you're able to spend time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much for spending your time with us today. If this conversation encouraged you, challenged you, or helped you feel a little less alone in your dating journey, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who might also need the encouragement. You'll find links in the show notes to connect with today's guest, as well as other ways to work with Lauren and me through coaching and other opportunities designed to support you in dating with clarity, trust, and integrity. We believe you don't have to shut down your desire or abandon your values to build a meaningful connection. And we're honored to walk alongside you as you navigate that journey. You can also find us on Instagram at Dating and Desire, or we'll continue the conversation. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.